Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back to my channel, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer, with you today. Alright, so what I want to spend a little bit of time on is I want to talk about intercepted signs. For those of you who may or may not know what they are or how to read them, etc. I'm just going to give you a small example using my own birth chart and just point to some tips on how to understand intercepted signs. But before I do that, let me just bring in Pluto. Okay, so when we're talking about intercepted signs, I'll show you what that looks like in a minute in case you're not understanding what I mean. Intercepted signs can be expressed in two different ways, in the sense of, or can indicate rather, can indicate that an individual has those intercepted signs. So it'll be two signs opposing each other that are intercepted in between the houses, and I'll show you what that looks like. So those two signs, depending on certain factors which I'll explain in a minute, are either lying dormant, unconscious in the person, and can be triggered, through planets transiting those signs or progress planets transiting those signs as well. So on the one hand, it could be an individual who has those signs, those archetypal energies and signs and qualities and whatever those signs represent, very underdeveloped in their soul's journey. Or it could be that they have those signs actually quite overdeveloped. That is, that they've really worked with those archetypal energies in previous incarnations many times over. So therefore, this incarnation, if they have intercepted signs, it could very well be that the emphasis doesn't need to be on those two archetypal energies, so they kind of take a back seat, if you like. I'll explain that more, and I'll explain what points to somebody who has those energies or archetypal expressions overdeveloped or underdeveloped. But when you are looking at these things, and when you're looking at your whole chart, always pay attention to Pluto, because Pluto is the soul. It is the evolutionary path of the soul. So wherever Pluto is located, it's going to it's going to show you where you feel empowered, because Pluto is power. Now, power can be used in destructive ways, as we know. That's obvious when we look at the state of the world. But power can also be used in very constructive ways when it's not used from a selfish ego space, right? We all know that. We all know that when we operate from that lower astral frequency, that pure ego drive space, our desires, because Pluto rules our desires, Pluto is what brings forth our desires, and then what makes us or encourages us or drives us or motivates us to reach for those desires. That's all Pluto's energy that does that in your chart. So the desires that we seek in life generally manifest or begin as an external search, okay? An external sort of seeking and searching and longing for XYZ, thinking that by attaining those desires out there that we'll actually feel happy or receive abundance or feel successful, etc. So if we are to stay on the path of the ego and just continue with our selfish desires, we're not really serving the soul, and we're certainly not serving spirit. So we're just serving the ego, right? So it's really important to pay attention to where Pluto is in your chart, because Pluto always points to, as I said, where we feel completely empowered, but where we can equally feel incredibly disempowered as well. Okay, so it has both sides to the coin, and that obviously will play out accordingly through various stages in our life, depending on our level of evolution and consciousness and how we are responding to the energies, the as above, so below, as within, so without. The as above, as below just literally means that the planetary energies that one was born into at the time, date and location of their birth, the energies that were taking place from birth over a duration of 90 days, and I've mentioned this in my previous video, that first 90 days, it sets the psychic and psychological tone of what we eventually are going to experience as above, so below, as within, so without. That's got to do with progressions, right? I talked about this when I did my video on progressions. This is all connected. You know, I always say that we cannot look at things in isolation because nothing is operating in isolation. So getting back to Pluto, I've talked about this in one of my other videos, but I'll touch on it again. Remember, when you're looking at Pluto and you're looking at a person's birth chart, your own birth chart, somebody else's birth chart, whoever, what you need to identify is there are 3 states of evolutionary processes. And okay, so the first one is the consensus state, which is the majority of people, you could say. The second one is the individuated state, and the final one is the spiritualized state. And the spiritualized state is Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, you know, lots of other people that weren't as, or you know, there's going to be people that have different views to this, that might say, well, Jesus wasn't a person, Krishna wasn't a person. It doesn't matter. I'm not here to debate that. I'm just talking about archetypal energies and in an astrological way through a birth chart. So spiritualized state is the highest evolutionary state that one can actually be in. Hence why we point to characters, people, whatever you want to call them, I don't care. Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, and many, many others. I'm using those 3 because they are the most well-known. I could even say Allah, you know, in terms of bringing in the whole Middle Eastern Arabic belief system. Anyway, that's not the point. It doesn't matter who we sort of reference it to. It's the idea is to understand the archetypal energy behind this kind of evolutionary state, which is a spiritualized state, meaning the person is completely awake, aware, illuminated, transcended, you know, all that sort of stuff. The consensus state, which is the majority of people, is the state of the world. When you look around at the world, you can see that, you know, the majority of people are in the consensus state. They are living in the world of what appears to be constructed, conditioned systems that affect people's consciousness, or lack of it, I should say, and they follow these ways, which is acceptable because most people are doing it. So they don't stop to think, well, hang on a minute, is this particular way of living and choices I'm making, is this really authentic? Is this really an elevated state? Is this really going to help me become illuminated? Is this really going to help me develop my soul? Is this going to help me wake up? Is this going to enable me to help others, to show the compassion and care and love for others? Or is this consensus state keeping me in a limited, constricted, confined space where I identify with fears and limitations and false apparent truths? So, and that involves the animal kingdom that is slaughtered for man's greed, essentially, and for their greed of their stomach, you know, believing that they need to eat meat to consume protein. And protein, in fact, comes from plants, not from animals. The reason animals have protein in them is because they eat a plant-based diet, essentially. Okay? Anyway, I don't want to get too kind of lost in all of that, because I know everyone has different views, and I'm not saying that these views are the right way for everybody, but this is my level of consciousness, my level of understanding, and this is the path that I choose to live by. So I do speak about it occasionally. Now, I kind of got a little bit off track there, but it's okay, because I think what I've said is really important, because what I'm trying to emphasize is the consensus state, which is the sheep state, the sleepwalking state. I don't, you know, I mean, how else can I put it? Okay. All right. So when you are looking at your birth chart, or at anybody's birth chart, the first thing you need to be determining is, what state is this person in? Consensus state, individuated state, or spiritualized state? When we are looking at a person's birth chart, remember, we are working with 12 zodiac signs. We are working with around about 10 planets and a bunch of different asteroids, for those who use asteroids, including myself. So we are all working with the same archetypal energy, whether we are aware of it or not. We are all born into this 3D reality. We all take a particular form, and we are all working with these archetypal energies, okay? But the thing that differentiates me from you, or you to somebody else, is our soul's evolutionary state and point, and where it's at, and therefore how it's experiencing these archetypal energies. You know, is it experiencing it in the consensus state, in the individuated state, in the spiritualized state? In addition to that, when you are examining a chart and you're trying to identify which level a person fits in, which is usually pretty easy to see, that's not very complex to figure out. The other thing that you naturally need to be looking at and bringing into the picture is, well, what's this person what's their cultural background? What's their educational background? What's their religious background? What's their upbringing like, you know, with their parents and their family? What sort of belief systems were they either indoctrinated with, or at some stage consciously chose to follow themselves? These are very important questions when you're wanting to understand how a person's birth chart is operating. You know, we can all read what Venus in Aries means, and we can all read what Venus in Pisces means, and we can all read what the Sun in Leo means, etc., right? But what does that mean for a particular individual is going to come down to these facts that I've already pointed out to you, okay? And a number of other different things as well. But essentially, we are always referring back to Pluto, the soul, the soul's path and evolution, the soul's desires. The soul's desires, as I said before, are always about, initially at least, being projected out there, feeling and thinking that I must achieve that, I must set those goals, I must complete that, I must try that, etc. All these are called, according to evolutionary astrology, these are called separating desires. That's the term that's used. And what that essentially means is that these type of external desires, they are called separating desires, because they take us further and further and further away from our soul, our self, and source. God, divine, whatever name you want to use, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so these separating desires, if a person remains in the consensus state, they will forever be on this journey of separating desires, which is essentially a life of misery to a very large degree. There's no true fulfillment and satisfaction in separating desires, because once you try to go for one particular desire, and let's say that you manage to fulfill that, well then the most natural thing is that the ego is going to say, well, now I want something else. I want something more. Let me find another desire and let me try and reach for that. So it's a never-ending external seeking that has no end point and no true point of fulfillment and authenticity on that deeper soul level. And if one is not operating from this level, well, they won't understand this and they won't really care, and it doesn't really matter. But for those of you that do, I suspect that you will find this information interesting, thought-provoking, and potentially encourage you to explore astrology from these levels, the much deeper levels that have substance, you know, not that popular astrology. No offense to the popular astrologers or people into popular astrology. I've never been into that. I'm very reluctant to even write things about, you know, transiting moon. I do that occasionally. I don't do it all the time. I do it when I see something pretty significant taking place, whether it's an eclipse or there's some, you know, pretty intense sort of aspects, which we've had that because we've had for a while now, you know, every time the moon gets into Capricorn, every time the moon, well, actually, yeah, Capricorn and Cancer, every time the moon gets into Capricorn and Cancer, it joins up with Pluto. It has this very intense energy that Pluto brings up every single month. We've been going through this for a while and we will continue for a while. So to me, that says that on a collective level, this Pluto in Capricorn, which is emphasizing the Cancer-Capricorn axis, is really trying to bring up a lot of stuff from the Cancer-Capricorn archetype and trying to wake people up on those levels. There's a lot of emotional purging going on when we've got Pluto moon circling around every month. Anyway, getting off track. Okay, refocus. Back on point. So when you are looking at your chart, remember to look at those 3 states of evolution in terms of where this person that you are looking at might fit in. Then, you know, naturally look at Pluto's location, because Pluto is where we can draw a great deal of power from. Again, as I said at the beginning of the video, if we are doing it from that ego, lower astral level, selfish level, you could say that there's not a great deal of evolution taking place from that space, okay? To keep it very simple. All right, I'll leave that aside for a moment, and because I want to do a whole big other section on Pluto to expand on what I've just reintroduced again, because I've added a few other things that will, you know, help you get some more kind of tips that you can write down and things that you can kind of reflect on and process and, you know, look at people's charts and so forth. So what I'm going to show you now is I'm going to show you intercepted signs. So I'm going to show you my birth chart. I haven't drawn everything in there. I've only drawn what is completely relevant. So let's just start with first looking at this. Okay, so you can all see that in this particular chart, there's Pluto in Virgo in the 9th house, Mars in Capricorn in the 12th house, Venus, am I saying that right? Venus in Pisces in the 3rd house, and Saturn in Taurus in the 4th house. Okay, so what we have here is we have a few different aspect formations, which are really important. We have a grand trine with Pluto, Mars, and Saturn. Can you see that? So Mars to Saturn, Saturn to Pluto, Pluto to Mars. That forms a grand trine. That is an Earth grand trine, okay? That's a pretty good configuration to have in your birth chart for many different reasons, which I'm not going to go into now. But it's important for you to see that now for what I'm about to go into. The other thing that this composition has is another planetary pattern, which is called the kite. The kite is a pretty interesting formation, and the kite actually involves all these planets. So how it's drawn up is Pluto trine to Mars, Mars trine to Pluto, Mars trine to Saturn, and then we have Venus is actually directly opposite Pluto. So Venus is what creates the kite. That's the handle of the kite. So if you can imagine lines drawn like that, in fact, I'll just show you. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. You can see a triangle, okay, which is the grand trine, and there's the kite handle, okay, and Venus is holding that. Now, they're pretty important aspect configurations for various reasons. The other thing that I want you to pay attention to is that Venus and Mars actually has what's called a sextile aspect, so they're also in a very good planetary configuration together as well. Now, if you look up here in my 10th house and my 4th house, what you may not be able to clearly identify it now, but what I want you to see is Scorpio and Taurus. Those two signs are actually intercepted in my chart. Now, the ruler to Scorpio is Mars and Pluto. Mars and Pluto are in a trine aspect together. Those two houses, 12 and 9, are really important houses for me, so they're quite emphasized. There's other things that I haven't drawn in that you can't see. Saturn in Taurus in the 4th house. Actually, before I make that statement, just rewind, just go back. So, yes, no, I already said this. So Pluto and Mars rule Scorpio. That's one of the intercepted signs in my chart, in the 10th house, intercepted. So my midheaven is Libra. It's quite late Libra. And then, so it's 20 degrees of Libra. And then there's only 10 degrees of Libra left. And then Scorpio begins. So Scorpio is in there in my 10th house. And the whole sign of Scorpio is actually contained within my 10th house, as is the sign of Taurus contained within my 4th house. So Scorpio and Taurus are the intercepted signs. Okay. The ruler to Taurus is Venus, its natural ruler. Now, Venus in my chart is pretty well aspected, and it is exalted. So a very emphasized planet in my chart again, and it also holds that whole kite formation together as well. So what I'm trying to point out to you here by mentioning these aspects is I'm trying to show you that those two intercepted signs, if the planetary rulers were not considerably aspected, or were not emphasized in the houses that they are, or if it was other houses for that matter, then it would indicate that those two intercepted signs for me are fairly underdeveloped and they remain unconscious, and so therefore they lie dormant and they're kind of out of reach of my consciousness until I have significant transits or secondary progressed planets going through the intercepted signs, Scorpio and Taurus, which will happen at some stage in my life. Now, the thing is, I'm not in that situation because my intercepted signs and their rulers, as I said, are very well placed. They're highly aspected. 2 of them are exalted. That is, sorry, I just had a disturbance at my front door. It was a bit strange. Okay, we'll leave that alone for now because I want to wrap this up. So when you're looking at intercepted signs, have a look at their rulers. Where are the rulers located? Are they in strong signs? That's one thing you'd look at. Are the rulers aspecting a lot of other different planets in the chart. What houses are the rulers in? So those levels are going to help you understand whether those intercepted signs are actually underdeveloped or doing okay. Overdeveloped even, you could say. So in my case, Scorpio and Taurus, that archetypal energy I've worked with in several lifetimes prior to this one. So it's not an energy that is in the forefront for me, okay? It's that those signs are intercepted. So that means that from an evolutionary point of view, it is other archetypal energies in this particular incarnation that I need to be working deeper on, right? To evolve these other signs. Hopefully that makes sense to you. If it doesn't, make a comment, ask a question, and we'll work it out. Okay, so I'll leave that with you. This was just a short little video where I can just give you a few tips on something extra you can be looking at. There's so many things to be looking at. There's so many levels. There's so many things, and I'll keep bringing more and more as time goes on. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and hope your new year, although it's not the true new year, I've said that and I'll say it again, true new year, 21st of March, vernal equinox, spring, 0 degrees Aries, that's the true new year. But having said that, I hope 2018 has begun in a prosperous, healthy, happy way for you, for all of you. Okay, so thanks so much again. Bye. See you soon.